Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Solutions for Substance Use Disorder ECHO. My name is Maria Gutierrez, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. This ECHO is brought to you by the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring, also known as CSTET, by Be Well Texas in collaboration with the UT Health San Antonio ECHO program. A few housekeeping items before we do begin. We have live closed captioning available for today's session. If you would like to view closed captioning for this session, please navigate to the bottom of your Zoom window and select the Show Captions option. If you're having trouble accessing captions or having connection issues, please chat Echo IT Cato for any assistance. To help us out with attendance, please enter your full name, affiliation, and email into the chat. Thank you so much to everyone that has gotten that started. Please do remember to stay muted unless you are speaking. And we do encourage joining by video and using the chat and/or the raise your hand feature to post questions or share any perspectives throughout today's session. We do welcome everyone's thoughts and comments. As a reminder, these sessions are being recorded and will be shared on our website. To ensure privacy, no personal health information is allowed at any point during today's session. This does include client patient names, addresses, birthdays, or any other identifiable information. At the end of the session, the ECHO team will be sending out a post-session survey link. We kindly ask that you complete it as this provides feedback on how to refine these sessions to better address your priorities. We are approved for CEs for paramedics and any public safety professionals with a behavioral health degree, such as social work or counseling credentials. Finally, ECHO is an all-teach, all-learn environment, so we do encourage everyone to participate in the conversation, raise questions, share any insights you might have. With that, we'll move on to some team introductions. I do see Dr. David Miramontes. If you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dr. Dave Miramontes. I'm the EMS Medical Director and Chief Medical Officer for the San Antonio Fire Department. And I have a very active MIH program dealing with buprenorphine therapy and navigation of folks into care in the San Antonio area.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miramontes. We also have Cynthia Mendiola.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here today. I'm excited about the lecture, and I am a retired federal probation officer. I also work with other agencies to help in community supervision and evidence-based practices. And currently, I'm working with immigrant safety. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Cynthia. We also have Jeremiah Golka.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Golka, Executive Director of the SHIELD Training Initiative. We provide trainings for law enforcement, first responders, criminal justice personnel that improves their occupational safety health, reduces their burnout, and improves effectiveness in their encounters with people who use drugs. So it's all about the win-win kind of approach. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. And having a dual role today, Dr. Brandon Del Pozo as our didactic presenter and hub team.
Hey, great. Thanks for the intro to the intro. I'm Brandon Del Pozo. I'm an assistant professor of medicine and health policy at Brown University. Prior to that, I was a police officer for 23 years, 19 in the New York City Police Department, and 4 years as the chief of police of Burlington, Vermont. So it's always great to meet up with colleagues in Texas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Del Pozo. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you to get us started with didactics.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's go ahead and do that. This is a little bit different than the typical didactic session. It's not clinically oriented. It takes a few steps back and it looks at the bigger question of when we have something that is clinically effective, a program that we're interested in, how do we make it work, right? How do we implement it in a way that has lasting effect, right? So it's the careful implementation of behavioral health interventions in public safety settings using implementation science. So let me go ahead and advance the screen. So first, I have no financial interest to disclose, and this is just the rest of the disclosures. This presentation consists of research funded by the National Institutes of Health. Are folks seeing the screen in advance? I just want to be sure.
Yep.
Jeremiah, can you give a thumbs up on the disclosures page? Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
good.
So thanks. Here are the learning objectives. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to understand how implementation science can determine the outcomes of a behavioral health intervention as much as the effectiveness of the intervention itself, describe how the field of implementation science can be used to study and improve the outcomes of a behavioral health intervention, distinguish between effectiveness outcomes and implementation outcomes. And you should have some basic knowledge of two prominent implementation science frameworks and how they might apply to a program or intervention that you are interested in. So a little bit about me, right? I joined the NYPD back in 1997. This is my promotion to sergeant in 2002. I started on patrol in Brooklyn. I went on to command two police precincts, and I became the chief of police of Burlington, Vermont. Where when I got there, my job was to implement change in the police department, is to pioneer a response to the opioid crisis, to build out our behavioral health capacity, to engage in different types of police innovation and reform. And that process made me realize that it's not just do I have an effective intervention that's evidence-based, but how well is it implemented? What implementation variables are we accounting for to make sure that this like facially valid intervention is something that actually delivers results in the field? So a lot of what you're going to see today is written up in an open access, free to read, universally available article. You can I'll put it in the link at some point. We can also go ahead and Google it, but it's using implementation science to improve evidence-based policing, an introduction for researchers and practitioners. This came out in Police Quarterly a little over a year ago. And like I said, it is open access. So you can go ahead and find it, read it, download it, spread it. I frame this in terms of policing. I know there's all sorts of law enforcement and first responders and behavioral health folks in the audience. This is not meant to only apply to policing, although I did prepare it for that, but you can think of how it applies as well to any first responder or public safety setting, right? These principles are more universal than the title evidence-based policing implies. That's just going to form the basis for this. So a lot of what we're going to talk today goes back to 1998, right? There's a famous article in Policing called Evidence-Based Policing, right? It came out in Ideas in American Policing out of the Police Foundation. Um, and it really set the stage for we can't just go with our gut. We can't just go with the way we've always done things. We need to follow the evidence when we design behavioral interventions, public safety interventions, in, for example, policing, right? So I don't know if you'd and one of the curiosities, I guess this is like this little reveal here that you'll see in a second, but if you are familiar with policing, you might nod when you see this, right? An estimated 85% of police practices remain untested by research and evidence. This is from that article. Most chiefs rarely read the criminology journals and instead base their practices on local custom. Most studies that do guide practice use weak, non-randomized research designs, right? If you're in law enforcement, policing, some first responder capacity, you're probably nodding. The trick, though, is that in the article on evidence-based policing, this one I just talked about, they didn't write this. Larry Sherman wasn't talking about policing when he wrote that. He's actually talking about medicine, right? The article was saying that 85% of medical practices remain untested by evidence. Most doctors don't read the journals, they just rely on local custom. And most studies that doctors use that do guide practice use weak designs, right? So, really, evidence based policing and evidence based public safety came from the movement of evidence based medicine. They wanted to get away from this, what you're seeing on the screen. And they said, well, in medicine, we need evidence back in the 90s. And then police scholars were like, wait, we also need evidence too. So evidence-based public safety finds its roots in evidence-based medicine. It's not just that public safety was getting it wrong and not following evidence, is it that medicine was as well, right? Larry Sherman, found that doctors resist change. Medicine is a battleground between research and practice, and evidence-based medicine was meant to address that. So if you're feeling a little bit beleaguered that a lot of what you're doing as a correction officer, as community probation or parole, or as a warden, or as a EMS or first responder or paramedic or cop is not necessarily evidence-based, you're following in prestigious footsteps because it wasn't in medicine either, right? And in fact, in medicine, it takes an average of 17 years for evidence to change practice, right? So one of the purposes of implementation science was a role uh, a field in medicine that would try to accelerate the 17-year evidence to practice gap, right? A new medication takes over a decade sometimes to make it out there. Just getting surgeons to consistently wash their hands before And surgery took quite an effort, right? And that's just a simple evidence-based practice. And that's because, like first responders, doctors culturally resist evidence, right? When you look at surgeons giving an account of what they do, they say that it's an art, right? We know that we have a medical degree. We know we trained as a residents for years. We know that we're held to high standards. But when we're there in the surgical theater, we have our gut feeling. And if you've been a detective, if you've been a patrol officer, or if you've been an EMT or paramedic, I bet there are times when you say, you know, I know what the best practices are. I know what the standards of care are, but I know what my gut says and what my experience says, and I'm going to follow it, right? That is helpful in a pinch, but it also gets in the way of adopting evidence-based practice. So what we have here in evidence-based policing, right, is ideally you have this virtuous circle between the evidence, the guidelines, the outputs, and the outcomes. But in reality, like there's this middle ground where police leaders just do their thing, right? Where folks in the street level bureaucracy out in the field just do their thing. And what implementation science does is tries to take a rigorous approach to adopting evidence-based change, right? So you can see that a lot of things can include the uptake of evidence-based practices, competing demands on frontline providers, lack of knowledge about where the evidence stands, lack of training and skills and resources, misalignment of research evidence is what your priorities actually are out there in the field. So there's a need to scientifically investigate what these barriers and facilitators are and do our best to make it match, right? So in reality, in a complex city, in a complex environment, you have the evidence, you have the practice, and where they meet is effective public safety. And what implementation science does is try to cram those two things together to make those two circles mesh as much as possible. So here's an example of how far we have to go. This is something that came out over 15 years ago called the Evidence-Based Policing Matrix. These scholars, Lum, Koper, and Telep, surveyed hundreds of police studies, public safety studies, trying to find what's effective. They categorized them by how proactive they were, whether the target was the individual, the group, the microplace, the neighborhood, the jurisdiction, the nation or state, the specificity of the intervention. Was it like very general or very focused? And they put it into this matrix. And then within that, they said there are evidence-based studies, there are studies that aren't that conclusive, there are ones that are pretty strong. But when they looked at, for example, I just picked three here, why something did or didn't work. Sometimes there's no evidence of an effect. Sometimes there's a mixed effect. But when you pull the lid off, only occasionally, number one, they found that effects decayed over time. Like you could have a really promising public safety practice. It could be, again, not just policing, probation or parole. And it starts out strong and decays over time. If you think about it, that could be because people revert to their old habits, because the funding for it was diminished, because new competing, it wasn't implemented with full fidelity. People began to cut corners as they did it, and also like they acknowledge basically that like also sometimes things didn't have an effect, but it was likely due to weak implementation, right? So if you're looking at, it's not a question of whether you can have a practice, you see the animation there, something, it's not whether it's effective. There's a twofold aspect we're looking for here that you got to keep in mind, especially if you're a boss implementing change. Is it the efficacious practice, right? Does MOUD reduce overdose? Does MOUD reduce crime? Does linkage to housing first reduce homelessness related problems? Is it an efficacious practice? Then we also need research that shows, is it effective as well? So it's not just efficacious, but efficaciousness plus good implementation should yield effectiveness, right? So we did a little bit of a study, my colleagues and I, to probe a little bit deeper, again, in policing. The study came out this year. We surveyed several dozen prominent American police executives, and we asked them from big agencies, New York, Philly, San Francisco, Detroit, Baltimore, why why innovations in policing don't work or don't translate, right? For some interesting findings that kind of bolster my argument here. The respondents overwhelmingly believe that the process of implementation bore very heavily on whether an innovation would succeed. 70% believe innovations failed because they were not implemented properly. When a new practice was introduced by an external source, about 74%, I can't see, blocking my own screen, disagree that ranking, like if something was coming from an outside source or an outside agency or an outside actor was imposing an innovation on the police, um, there was a lot of agreement that the rank and file wouldn't trust the actors who helped create it, and that would impede successful implementation, right? Beyond that, there's 81% agree that when an agency provides an alternative to arrest, for example, let's say that we want to go long on behavioral health rather than arrest, we want to link people to treatment and care rather than arraign them, um, or that we want some alternative to arrest as usual. The vast majority of respondents said that's probably going to be more complicated than arrest as usual. Cops won't know how it's used in performance evaluations, and that's going to make it less effective, right? 62% agreed that when alternatives to enforcement are introduced, they're more difficult to execute than the original practice. If we're trying to get public safety to mesh with public health, trying to get behavioral health interventions implemented for example, law enforcement, oftentimes they're more complicated than business as usual. And which shouldn't surprise anyone, but police culture determines if a given practice will succeed more so than some executive saying that the new practice is going to be the one that everyone's going to follow, right? So there's like a few stages of change that I characterized in all of this. Well, one is we've always been doing implementation science. It's called leadership. We should be the ones teaching it. Like I've heard this defined. We don't need this quasi science. We're leaders. We know what to do. Like if police innovation is a track record, that's just that's just not true. Then there is the barriers and facilitators that make implementation succeed are fairly real. We should be mindful of them, like this gradual realization that there are barriers and facilitators to implementation in our first responder fields. We got to be aware of them if we're being smart leaders. Then there's let's be retrospective. Let's see what we can learn from our past attempts, from our past successes and failures. We'll do postmortems and we'll start using what we learned from those postmortems as good implementation science guides, right? Then there's advancing your thinking a little bit more. We're about to implement something. Let's prospectively try to figure out what we know about barriers and facilitators, try to identify them, and try to account for them in advance to ensure our success prospectively going forward, right? And then there's like the we're about to implement something. Let's identify the most important determinants and let's design an experiment to see in our own agency, does having sergeants or supervisors be the champions work better than having executives be the champions? Does having outside consultants come in and teach a new skill work better than having our in-house trainers, right? Let's be experimental. And that is sort of like the gold standard is not only being prospective about it, but being experimentally prospective, right? And we're a long way from that, but that's sort of where I want to head. And let's just go to the next. Right. So you see, you move from backwards looking to forwards looking, and your implementation will be more effective once you do so. So it just is a resource that's out there, right? Like healthcare is not that new to this, especially the hospital setting and the large healthcare setting, more so than first responders. But one of the things they did in healthcare is combine, is they talked to experts over the course of several months and compiled 76 implementation strategies that folks could use as sort of an inventory to figure out if we're going to introduce a new practice, if we're going to introduce a change, these 76 strategies might help us, right? This is the one that first responders, especially uniformed first responders, love the most, right? Have leaders mandate change. Have leadership declare a priority and have their determination to have it implemented. How many times have you come and say, this is what the boss wants, here's the new procedure, damn it, you're going to do it, right? What that often accompanies is develop disincentives, right? You mandate change and then punish people for not doing the change. That is just one process. It's a typical uniformed first responder process. It is ironically probably the least effective process for high stakes change. But if you were interested, number one, I have that open access article I told you about. There'll be references available in the slide deck. There is this is also open access, the 76 implementation strategies for healthcare settings. And you can start to think about in your own setting, if you're a supervisor or boss, which variables count toward making things effectively implemented, which barriers, which facilitators, and which strategies might work for you. I'm going to close this in the next few minutes by discussing two implementation science frameworks that might be helpful for you to at least start thinking about as you try to implement change in behavioral health in your organizations. One is called the EPIS framework, right? It's exploration, preparation, implementation, and sustainment. It's been used in juvenile justice settings. It's been used in hospital settings. It's a favorite of the criminal legal system, sort of like in the trial and adjudication, and even the community correction setting. So you have an exploration phase where you evaluate what's the need we're trying to fill. That's when you decide to adopt a change. We're going to now, in the correction setting, link people to MOUD because it's going to reduce recidivism and save lives and put people at reduced overdose risk when they get out, right? The preparation phase is of what's this going to require, and not just mechanically what it's going to require. Well, we got to get MOUD into the prison setting. We have to get nurses working there. We have to get some inventory control over the medicine. Also, like, what's it going to take to build it into the workflow? What's it going to take for correction officers not to be overwhelmed by this? What's it going to take for, I mean, we could think of, I know Dr. Miramontes talks about implementing buprenorphine induction in the ambulance setting, right? That's not just about getting buprenorphine physically in the ambulance, right? It's also about figuring out how to get paramedics and EMTs to buy into it, how to get them to do it with fidelity, how to get them to really like absorb the training and become an advocate for it, right? Then you do implementation, which is iterative. You're looking at the barriers and facilitators, seeing what's working and what's not. And then you got to figure out how to sustain it, right? And we lose a lot there, but in practice, you need sustained funding. You need training to train new folks how to do it. You need to make sure it's worked into performance evaluations. Things that seem like common sense, but often we do half-heartedly, and then we don't sustain the innovation, right? And this becomes a cycle in the EPIS. We have the community wanting something, we have our bosses wanting something, we have the leadership, we have the people doing the work on the ground. There's all these variables. You can take a moment. We don't have the time in this type of setting to really do a deep dive into these variables, but there's plenty of open access scholarship that takes a deep dive into this. You can see from in the outer context, the politicians, the funders, the press, the inner context, your own organization, the innovation factors, like how daring of an innovation is this? Or is it a ground ball? Is it just washing your hands? Or is it a whole new way of approaching a problem, right? And then what bridges, what forms relationships between all of these contexts? You can see, and it's a cycle. You don't just do, you may explore, find the need for something, implement it. That may expose the need for something else. You explore that, find the need for it, implement it, and then you're sustaining a few things, right? The other thing is the framework we'll talk about is the consolidated framework for implementation research. If you copy this down and Google it, this is also all open access. You can access this all for free. There's a whole website about it. But what this is a master framework of implementation variables, right? The variables, there are dozens and dozens of variables that we identified that could affect implementation success for your behavioral health intervention, right? And they have 5 basic domains. The variables happen in the innovation domain. What's the thing being implemented? The outer setting, the hospital system, the school district, the state, that's where budgetary and political concerns happen, right? Where they might set timelines. The mayor might say to the fire chief, I want this done by Christmas so I can have a press conference about it. And the fire chief's like, all right, we got to do it. That's the outer setting. The inner setting is within your hospital, your organization, your school, your city, right? There might be multiple inner settings if it's a complex collaborative intervention. There's the individuals, the men and women, the people doing the thing, their motivations, their incentives, and then the process itself, right? The implementation process from the planning to the implementation to the feedback to the evaluation to the sustainment. We're not going to go ahead through all the variables here, but if you're seeing this science for the first time, just to raise your awareness that there are dozens and dozens, there's scientists and researchers who have identified within these domains, the ones we're looking at here, dozens and dozens of variables that are unique to some settings, but they span settings. That when you're thinking of implementing something, take a minute, go to this website, look up the variables and say, you know what? That one about performance evaluations would really apply to my project. Or this one about like pressure from the external community like really applies to this thing I'm trying to do. Or sustainment, like we only got a 2-year grant to do this and we're going to need to sustain it. We need to identify a funding stream that's really going to bear on implementation. Or um, culture has always been centered around this one type of treatment. We have to get champions, people who are trusted, charismatic leaders. It might not be the boss. It might be one really, really highly esteemed veteran paramedic who could be the one who says, guys, gals, this is the change that we need. Identifying and leveraging that person could be key to implementation, right? Or building in recurring training and feedback. But don't reinvent the wheel. Like you might, if you're saying this is common sense, to an extent it is. But what implementation science does is it, in the context of organizational change, it systematizes and rigorously dissects and makes systematic a lot of what we think is common sense and lays it out in discrete variables, discrete domains, discrete processes to help us along so we're not just kind of feeling our way through organizational change, right? Um, so I'll skip over this in the interest of time. Um, but one of the things you want to think about is the logic of what you're doing. And this is just a way to lay out the logic. You know, you're not researchers, so you don't have to memorize this or buy into it, but you have certain things that determine, and again, this is not does methadone work? Does buprenorphine work? Does a defibrillator work? Does drug court work? It's not about effectiveness. Things could work because they're inherently effective, right? Methadone and buprenorphine are inherently effective, but the system that gets it to the right people at the right time can be implemented in a million different ways, and those variables can affect whether the project fails or not, right? So you look at you have to figure out your determinants, and I just talked about in EPIS and the consolidated framework. They give you a laundry list of determinants to explore. Then you develop your implementation strategies, right? And you see, these are the strategies we're going to use to implement. We're going to have periodic training. We're going to work this into performance evaluations. We're going to have feedback. We're going to go ahead and identify local champions to go ahead and really convince line employees that this is great, right? Then you want to be sure that there's some logic behind that. Well, how's that going to get us to our outcomes, right? Between procedures, funding, proper IT infrastructure, good performance evaluations, feedback, and champions, you can guess what the mechanisms might be to properly implement something. Then you get your outcomes. And here's what I want to stress. You have to, as a innovator in behavioral health, not just think about the effectiveness outcomes. Are we reducing overdose? Are more people completing community supervision successfully? Are we getting more people into housing? But the implementation outcomes. Do my employees and colleagues like the new system? Do they accept it? Do they think it's appropriate for their goals, right? These are the, is it acceptable? Is it feasible? Are people adopting it? Is it penetrating the organization? Does the organization want to sustain it? That's separate from whether the thing is working or not to achieve a goal. These are, I'm just, because some of you may be hearing it for the first time, repeating myself, these are implementation outcomes. Acceptability, feasibility, adoption, penetration, cost effectiveness. You have to keep those outcomes in mind if you're looking to sustain a program and make it work. Not just does the thing itself achieve the mechanical goal. Does methadone sit on the opioid receptor and prevent overdose? Yes. But getting methadone to people in jail requires a hell of a lot more than that, and it needs to be acceptable, feasible, cost effective, et cetera. And then when that comes together, to have an effective program that yields good results for the client, right? So you go from the implementation outcomes to the service delivery outcomes to the client level outcomes, right? So we'll go through these things quick and we'll end. The takeaways are that you need to, in the pie in the sky, understand that effectiveness and implementation go hand in hand. Implementation is a cyclical process, not just a linear one. You may have to take a step back and re-implement things or tweak them. You want to allocate resources not just to the proposed initiative. Well, we have funding to do X, but allocate resources and time to developing an implementation strategy. You want to find the implementation stakeholders early and involve them and keep and it's not just the bosses, right? You want the implementation stakeholders or rank and file, could be local politicians, could be community members. And you also want to, there are people dying to do implementation research in behavioral health settings. So find those people, invite them to do an implementation science research experiment in your agency, and you'll get free expertise. The very last thing, once you see implementation science, you can't unsee it. And the holy grail of implementation science is de-implementation, right? It's not just implementation, but there are certain practices that you want to replace or stop. And like homing pigeons or lost dogs, and people want to continue doing things as usual instinctively. So all of what I just said not only applies to effectively implementing new practices, but all these variables, all these cultural concerns, all these domains also apply to de-implementing things that don't work well, instead of reflexively continuing to do them because that's the way we've always done them. So I'll stop with that. We've gone on for about 26 minutes. and we can take some questions and move on to the case.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Lipos. I think that was such a strong ending of just reminding us how, it takes a lot of unlearned behaviors to really be able to make some of that change. Do we have
Yeah.
any comments or questions for Dr. Del Pozo? Andrea?
Yes, regarding that EPIS model, is that model commonly used in public organizations related to public safety? And is it costly? I mean, in terms
Yeah,
of
so EPIS,
expenses.
thank you. That's a great, see, money comes up, that's shrewd. EPIS itself has been used, when I say widely, like with a lot of growing traction in the juvenile justice setting, in the correction setting, because the researchers funded by the National Institutes of Health got their early research dollars to work on EPIS in those settings. So if you go ahead and put EPIS in to Google Scholar or even just the general Google search bar, you'll start seeing the research coming up on that. Hospital settings are using it more. The thing about the cost is it's all free to use. It's how much, literally, how much person power, how much staffing time are you going to devote toward, instead of just, all right, everybody, the boss wants a new program. Here's the procedure for it. We got some funding. Let's do it. Right. That's kind of how we did a lot of police innovation in my day. To say, I'll give you the example, like Portugal, when Portugal decriminalized drugs. I'm just bringing this up because it's been on my mind lately. Not that that's happening anywhere in our setting. They took a year to implement it. They devoted a year's worth of time, that's person power, planning power, training budget, to planning the implementation. So how much EPIS costs is contingent on how much physical resources and people resources you allocate to implementation, right? If it's $0, it's free, but then you might get a poorly implemented plan. If it takes a year to implement the program, it might be costly, but you might get great implementation. EPIS is a guide, not like a brand. You don't hire. I guess you could hire EPIS consultants, but that's not necessarily what this is about.
I do see a comment from James Campbell. Would you like to unmute and say that out loud for the Learning Network?
I was just saying that I really appreciate that balance between implementation and de-implementation, that tendency to drift back away from evidence-based practice to business as usual or treatment as usual is really strong, and it's really kind of part of our makeup neurobiologically. So I really appreciate you including that. The struggle is oftentimes not going back to old practices that may not have been as effective. So thank you for including that.
Yeah, no, of course. The example I give in policing is actually shooting at cars. Because the NYPD banned shooting at cars unless someone in a car is shooting at a cop, you shoot back at the person shooting. But if it's just a car that's you're chasing or coming at you, the NYPD for years has said, get out of the way. It's better for public safety. And the evidence does bear that out. We don't have to dive into that. But the point is, across the country, NYPD shootings went down in the 70s, 40% 1 year after they stopped shooting at cars. And there's yet to be an NYPD officer seriously injured as a result. Getting agencies around the country to even consider that has been like a gargantuanly difficult task. And I bring that up as a prime example of like a practice gets ingrained, it's part of the culture, people don't want to give it up. And you don't just pass a policy, you need to account for so many variables to properly de-implement something. So thanks. Yeah. And don't, I think it's just as important as implementation. And I guess you were saying that.
Jeremiah, you have your hand raised.
Thanks. Brandon, that was a really, really good presentation. Really interesting. I'm going to ask the question that when I hear this kind of question, I usually get annoyed. So I'm going to say, feel free to say, no. But I'm sure when different agencies, hear about this stuff, they kind of want to do the like, okay, what are the top 3 or top 5 things I need to know about, or that are common that commonly seem to work? Are there kind of a set of commonly effective implementation science tools that we're seeing have some effectiveness in public safety agencies?
Yeah, no, that's just so one of the things I'd love funding to do is to take those 76 healthcare strategies and port them down because a lot do carry over, but really tailor them toward public safety settings because there's a little bit, there's differences in culture and whatnot. But to answer your question, I think that, and this will be kind of like a no duh, but it's often ignored. The first the line level police supervisor, or the first level, the field supervisor in a public safety setting, is a hugely influential actor, right? I've seen that in all my own research. You've seen it in your research. Like paramedics and police and firefighters will tell you, no duh. And I think one thing that when you're looking to really properly plan and implement organizational change and then sustain it, involving the most esteemed and most influential sergeants, or the paramedic version of a sergeant, or the firefighter version of a sergeant, that line supervisor, is like vital, right? And when you can, even I did research on why police do or don't want to participate in research, and one of the things that came up in that setting too was like, if my sergeant believes it's a good study and believes it's fair research and believes that it's worth, I'm probably going to participate. So I won't give you the top five, but I think like we lose track in hierarchical organizations of the fact that like the most influential people are often not the chief or the CEO, but the line supervisor, and really involving them in the beginning in an implementation process is key.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and the other thing I would say, making sure that the change is no more onerous than what you're trying to replace, because alternatives to arrest are always more onerous than arrest. Arrest is so efficient, sadly, in the US, meaning like it should be efficient, but other things should be efficient. Um, and understanding how it works into performance evaluations. And I'm going back to arrest, but cops understand exactly where arrest figures into their career trajectory. But if you're saying don't arrest, send that person to treatment, they need to understand how that competes in their career trajectory. Those are important variables.
Cynthia, I also see that you posted something in the chat.
No, I just wanted to really support some of the information that Dr. Del Pozo was saying, because I've seen it, organizational change. It's very scary for some agencies because, and also the people that want to implement what's evidence-based, because a lot of times they want to throw out everything, and you've done so much work doing what works and how to end up at the end for sustainability. So I appreciate everything that you've said today.
No, thank you so much.
It's there, exactly what you're saying.
I put the article Introduction to Implementation Science into the link into the chat. And understand it's not it is, so you can tell by my body language. A lot of this is good leaders and grasp a lot of this intuitively. A lot of it is common sense, but don't underestimate like the complexities of organizational change, right? And how to do it carefully and sustain it. And the National Institutes of Health is putting a lot of money into developing implementation science, because as much as hospital systems are different and ambulance and public safety systems are different, there's enough commonalities that if we figure out how to work change into systems in a sustainable way, we can learn from each other, right? And so this is trying to make that more systematic. This is about systematic organizational change.
Thank you, everyone, for that great discussion regarding today's didactics. We'll go ahead and move on to announcements, and then, like Dr. Del Pozo mentioned, we'll go on to our case presentation for today as well. To claim your CE credits, you must complete the post-session survey in the chat or by email sent after the session. When you asked, are you applying for CEU credit for today's ECHO session, please make sure to select yes. Your certificate of completion will be sent to you in 2 to 3 weeks after the session date. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email bwilltexas@utesca.edu. We do encourage everyone to complete the survey. Your feedback is very valuable and helps us improve and tailor future sessions to better meet your needs. Next slide. We invite you to join a trauma-informed training offered by Gain Center. Candidates for this training are public safety professionals, including emergency personnel, organizations, reentry specialists, court personnel, law enforcement officers, and mental health and substance use providers. To register, please feel free to visit that link that will be posted in the chat shortly. Next slide. Call for presenters for Texas 2026 is now open. We do invite professionals across substance use and behavioral health, including researchers, providers, peer specialists, and community leaders, to submit a presentation and poster proposals. Here you can share your innovative solutions, emerging research, and collaborative approaches that advance substance use care and recovery in Texas. You can submit your proposal using the link in the chat as well. Next slide. Finally, please join us for our next Public Safety Solutions for SUD ECHO on Thursday, January 8th at 11 a.m. We'll have a presentation on substance use and drug courts. Thank you so much, Cato. With that, we'll move on to our case presentation. Stephanie, if you'd like to please introduce yourself and then go ahead and review the case for us.
Hey everybody, my name is Stephanie Newton and I'm a deputy for Richland County Sheriff's Department, and I'm also our lead case manager. So today I'm going to share a case with you that we received as a deflection from one of our deputies. And this individual is a 55-year-old Caucasian male who was unhoused and staying in a high crime area that was heavily populated in substance use. He was using fentanyl, heroin, and meth intravenously. When we met the individual, while we were trying to complete his assessment and find placement at a treatment facility. He was under the influence of substances, which made the encounter more urgent. During this encounter, we used motivational interviewing and harm reduction strategies. The individual lacked stable housing, had a family history of substance use, and had been an intravenous user off and on over the span of 25 years. So some of the barriers we encountered during this interaction were insurance and transportation to treatment. The individual himself was also a barrier because during the assessment and treatment placement process, he walked off to use substances and we found him crossing a busy street while under the influence. Some things that went well during the encounter were the individual agreed to go to treatment and we were able to quickly secure placement at a facility within 24 hours after our initial assessment. He did in fact end up having insurance, and the treatment facility was gracious enough to waive over $7,000 in out-of-pocket costs so that he could go there with no financial barriers. And because of our funding, we were able to make him a care package, which consisted of food, clothing, and hygiene products. He also had the support of his family, and they were able to bring other important items for him. Something that I would do differently if presented with this scenario again would be to try and have resources available for temporary shelter until the individual can be transported to treatment. As you all know, it could be challenging finding some of these individuals again if you were unable to transport right away. And thankfully, I was able to locate him and transport him to the facility myself due to the location. What I believe success might look like for this case is the individual would be employed so that he would have meaningful work to do. He would have a continued family support system, and he would have a recovery plan in place. We are working on getting him referred to peer support, but he has not yet shown interest. So I do ask, what other resources can be offered to a person in this situation? And how can we motivate the person to pursue peer recovery services and other alternatives being offered to him?
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that case presentation. I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for any questions or comments for Stephanie regarding today's case.
So this is Dr. Miramontes. I take care of a lot of folks like this, unfortunately. And usually the progression that I use is peer support first, housing second, and then treatment, because you really can't do you can't use any kind of MOUD if they're homeless, because they have no place to lock up their stuff and their meds get stolen. They don't have a phone, they don't have transportation, they don't have a home base. So I usually do the opposite, which is start with peer support or day drop-in treatment at one of the homeless outreach folks, work to getting them in some kind of a housing situation and treatment, all kind of as a package. Maybe this guy's just not ready for recovery, right? That may be why he's not engaging with peer support. But these are complicated. I always find that my patients that are unhoused, the biggest challenge is the unhousing part, because it's hard to go the next step in the recovery process if you don't have a stable place to live, you don't know where your food's going, you have no place to lock up your stuff, you've lost your ID repeatedly because you're homeless, and you get your stuff ripped off, you get your MOD drugs ripped off. It's really hard to do outpatient treatment in someone who doesn't have a place to land their head at night.
Okay, thank you.
I think that when you're encountering these types of situations with individuals like you have, it's always the best thing is what you've done is meeting them where they're at and trying to save their lives and hoping that they are ready for the next intervention. Yeah, the ideal is, hey, let's get them in a situation where they'll be more stable, but sometimes they're just not ready for that. And what you've done is ensuring that that person is, ready to live another day, and at one point will be ready for recovery and all of the services that would help them move forward.
Thank you.
So I'll jump right in there. We had a project called Project Integra where we had a mobile unit going around the county, and we had individuals that were unhoused, that were similar situations. I think the most important point is to really to help the person understand what peer support services are, and that doesn't mean that you have to change or you have to go to treatment. I think just having that safety space of having conversation and really ultimately having a conversation of what matters to you right now. What is priority? What is the primary goal in your current situation? And so when we can really work with an individual to help them meet their personalized goals and give them the autonomy of what's going on in their life, they're more receptive to build rapport and to build that trust and to allow us to help them and navigate them. Right? So, if an individual is unhoused and their biggest concern is not getting their meds stolen today, um, or having a possible tent to stay in so they don't get soaking wet when the storm rolls through, right? So, these are surviving in the elements is priority over stepping into a life of long-term recovery at this point, right? And so really meeting a person where they're at, allowing them to really be the navigator of their pathway, really has shown to open up the doors to allow peers to help them in other areas when they're like, wow, my voice is heard, they hear me. And so then there begins to be this rapport and relationship to really help and navigate individuals. So that's our experience here in Houston. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. And also, we have had similar conversations like you're talking about with the individual. He was actually able to move back in with his family once he completed his 30 days at this facility. So he has a place, I suppose, temporarily. It's not permanent. We did have some conversations about what was important to him. And for him, it was just having employment. Like that was just his big thing, just to get him back into what he was doing before he became a user. So I've been trying to kind of work with him on that, but he's really liking to kind of do things on his own. He thinks, there's all these places out there that he used to work at. He feels like he may be able to get himself back in. I've provided resources and I've kind of stepped back a little bit on it just to allow him to kind of figure out if that's the route he wants to go.
Yeah, and another thing I would say additionally is providing like peer support groups, right? So that he can just hear similar situations. Because sometimes, although people have good intentions and want to help us, we're not hearing anything they're saying when we're kind of in that space. And if we can help get them in a positive scenario with similar situations, there might be this motivation to go, well, maybe I need to do like A, B, and C before I actually go get this job so that I can keep the job. That's the important piece. I know here in Houston, our program has a virtual peer support group that's open to the public, and I can share that in the chat. Anybody's welcome to share that out, and it could be beneficial to whomever might want to use it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that input, Jessica. I do think that when it comes to, hearing out people that have gone through similar steps or just a similar background, that really does resonate a bit more than hearing, others kind of speak on their behalf, and share these resources. I really do think it's all about, finding that common ground to be able to succeed. And I do see someone in the chat has mentioned, that please do share those peer support links to share out with everyone.
Just to bring up, so he's got housing, great, temporarily, probably. The work thing is really going to get in the way of his schedule for recovery, whether it be going to clinic, doing peer support, whatever that, because unfortunately, in our wacko world, most of those resources are only available 8 to 5, right? So if he's going to work during that time, that's going to put up some barriers for his recovery. He may want to go slow to go fast. That means maybe giving in sober living environment for a little while, work the program, get himself stable on whatever treatment program he's going to be on, and then work at integrating in back into the workplace. I think it's noble and great that he has that work ethic. That's actually a real positive strength for this individual, but it may get in the way and conflict with his recovery plan, because unfortunately, most of the services he needs are going to be programmed 8 to 5.
Right. And I've suggested a few, I've reached out and I've tried, but he's just not ready for those yet. And he has to be ready for those. But I have offered, we do have we have peer support here who is also available just if they need to start by a phone conversation. If he's just not ready to go in yet, they can do it over the phone. He's not shown interest in that either.
Has he done detox or some kind of inpatient?
He did detox, and then he did a 28-day, I think it was 28-day medicated assistant treatment.
All right. So we're on treatment.
Mm-hmm.
He has a place to stay, but now we're in kind of the sustainment of that program is what's in question.
Yes, he's more so, from what I'm understanding from what he's telling me, just trying to be abstinent. I don't believe that he wants to do any sort of medication assisted recovery of the sort. He's trying to stay pretty abstinent.
Again, if he's not working the magic, he's going to unfortunately probably start using when things get stressful again.
Right.
So if he's not doing peer support in a group or counseling, we're going to have to just keep an eye on him, because he's probably going to unfortunately relapse, which, as we all know, relapse is part of the disease. It's known. It's part of the process. And if that happens, we just take it as a part of the disease and we move forward with the next step.
I have a question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of with these people, since they don't have a specific address, in terms of tracking them down, how do we go back to them and offer them services or options of resources if they are not as stable in one place? Is there a way that normally public agencies log in or document somehow a way to get back to them?
I think with us, it's really, I mean, we just kind of know the roundabout area of where they are. And we just hope that we find them where they usually are. There's really no rhyme or reason to my knowledge. We we really hope sometimes that they have phones so we can call or text, but a lot of times we find ourselves just going to where we know that they're usually at, or some of our like region deputies may just be more familiar since they're around a good bit more and they may have a better understanding.
So again, I think, this is about building rapport. So when you're working with the population of individuals that are unhoused or find themselves in this cycle of being housed, unhoused, housed, unhoused, shelter. What we have found in the past is having what we call locator forms. And on those forms, when we first initially meet with someone, we'll have discussions of where do you normally hang out? Who are your go-to people? Um, who are your best friends, or who do you call? Who do you check in with? Do you call your auntie, your mom, your sister? Where do you normally hang out? Do you hang out at this restaurant, at this park, down the street? Right. So we really kind of narrowed down to where are the top 3 places in the event that I needed to come see where you're at and have a conversation with you and provide some resources to you. Where could I find you? And this has been hugely beneficial. We've also ask for their handles on all their social medias: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you're at. So this has shown that whenever individuals they may not have an active phone, but whenever they get near Wi-Fi, whether that's library, the local McDonald's, Starbucks, wherever they may be, they can check their social media. And so these are places where peer specialists can say, hey, how you doing? I'm checking in on you. Whenever you get service, whenever you get Wi-Fi, just let me know you're okay. I have some resources for you. Because things come up all the time within community, giveaways and resources and things of that nature. So that's been very helpful. Just again, giving them that space to let us know and give us the green light to contact certain people when we're looking for them, to try to locate them in certain areas that they might hang out versus other places.
I do see a lot of head nods, so I think a lot of folks do appreciate that idea and that strategy that you use, Jessica. I do see that Cynthia's mentioned the locator form is a great tool to use while establishing rapport with someone who will eventually share the information from our hub team. Any other final thoughts, comments for Stephanie and the team? Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Pozo, for a summary recommendations.
Yeah, thanks. In the interest of time, we'll keep this relatively brief. That was a straightforward case with a few important recommendations. One is the importance of housing. I think this came up in a few ways because we have these opportunities to provide someone with services. We can give them motivational interviewing, engage them, but people who don't have stable housing are going to be lost to follow up. So one of the important things to do is always have a sort of a housing or shelter plan in mind, just so for 2 reasons. One, to give the person the stability to adhere to the treatment and services that you're offering. And two, so that you know where to follow up with them, right? When you go to find them. Relatedly, we talked about the importance of peer support services, right? The way that motivates people, helps make them ready for change, gives them like a trustworthy place for to go to, weigh their next set of options. And then we also, Dr. Miramontes brought up the important need to, when you plan these services and these interventions, there's going to be this inherent conflict between the need to have people work, or the requirement they work, or the desire that they work, or the need for them to keep a roof over their head they're working, and service delivery, right, which often happens in a way that conflicts with work hours. It's harder to come up with recommendations for that, but something to be very, very mindful of. Um, and then related to all of this as well, nestling in with peer services and housing and losing people to follow up is going through whatever it takes to build a rapport with people. So the more of a rapport you build, the bigger your network. I mean, just building out a network so you know where to find people on the street. If you know 20 people who know 20 people and you're looking for Joe and you're trusted, they'll let you know where Joe is. building a rapport with Joe himself in order for him to let you know where he'll be and trust you. And then also doing things like finding out where people live on social media, not just on the street, right? So you can use other ways to follow up with them. But I guess the takeaway from this case is that you have somebody who's definitely amenable to services and turns out has insurance, but the transient nature of their lifestyle makes it hard to link them and then hard to follow up. And that's one of the big challenges we have with this population in general.
Thank you so much, Dr. Del Pozo, for that great summary. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's session. Thank you, everyone, for joining our ECHO. As a reminder, to earn continuing education credits, please complete the post-session survey that has been posted in the chat. If you would like to present a case, please email the Be Well Texas team at bewelltexas@utesca.edu. We look forward to seeing everyone next session on Thursday, January 8th. With that, we wish everyone happy holidays and Happy New Year. Thank you, everyone.